Being a leader is hard work. Doing it well is likely among the most difficult things you will do in your life. So, if I told you that a wise person could give you 5 steps to improve your success and effectiveness as a leader, would you be interested? I know I would. That's one of the reasons I'm excited for this conversation and one of the reasons this guest is here. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively, make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast, you could join us live for future episodes on your favorite social media channel. You can get access to those live episodes, find out when they're going to be, so you can interact with us and get this information sooner. In this case, about 5 weeks sooner, you could have had this information. So to get all that information about the schedules and when and where to get connected, you can join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by our newest product, the Productivity Intensive, a 45-day process to improve your productivity for the rest of your life. Learn more at remarkablepodcast.com/productivity. And with that, I'm going to bring in our guest. I'm going to welcome him in. Here he is. Let me introduce him to you. His name is David Dodson. He's on the faculty at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, where he guides students in tactical execution. In 2023, The Economist listed his course as one of the 3 hottest courses at Stanford. He also holds an economics and business degree from Stanford. Following a career as a consultant at McKinsey, he became a serial entrepreneur where he operated 6 companies as CEO or executive chair. He has since served on as a board member to more than 40 public and private companies and has been an active investor in over 150 businesses. In 2000, he co-founded Sanku, which developed the only successful technology to fortify grains with life-saving micronutrients in rural African mills. This award-winning technology has helped he and that team save and improve the lives of over 5 million rural families in Africa. He's a frequent business commentator on CNBC and Fox News, has been published in the New York Times, Boston Globe, Fortune, Forbes, CNN, all of those places, and many more. He has now put all of his experience into this book. It's called The Manager's Handbook, 5 simple steps to build a team, stay focused, make better decisions, and crush your competition. Since it came out earlier this year, it's been on both the Wall Street Journal and Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller list. Did I get that part right?
Yep.
Welcome, David Dodson, everybody. David, thanks for being here.
No, thank you. I just wish my kids were listening to this so that they could hear that introduction. That was really kind of you.
Like who
Thank you.
Mean, I just read what your mom gave me. No, I'm just teasing. So, well, listen, I'm so glad.
But I wish I was with you because I understand you're at your farm today.
Well, I am. I'm just down the road from my farm, actually. I'm at a friend's farm who has better internet. That's the short answer here. When I'm at our farm, I don't have great internet. So I'm at George's, everybody. So David, I sort of gave the brief view of your sort of career process. What led you to this place to write this book? Sort of what leads your journey to this point?
So my career started as an entrepreneur. So I ran a number of companies, as you had indicated earlier, and then I was asked to come back to teach at the Stanford faculty at the business school. And in parallel with that, I shifted from being an operator to being an investor. So I was working with students as well as working with CEOs who are early in their career. And so I was being asked a lot of the same questions over and over again, and I started kind of writing out the answers, and that it was kind of the basis of what eventually ended up being the book. By the way, Kevin, I did not intend to write a book, but I kept hearing the same things over and over again.
Well, but it didn't exactly happen by accident, on the other hand. I mean, I know you may not have started with that, but
I did
without there being an intention when it's over.
No, I in the end, for all those Post-it notes in the book, that makes my heart feel great. But alongside of this, I was just sort of observing how some people were just way better at getting things done than others. So I started this 3-year research process looking at some of the most extraordinary leaders and trying to find out, like, why did things work out so much better for them? So, for example, looked at Sam Walton. And in 1962, when he opened up his first store, remember, he was surrounded by Sears and Kmart and Target. And he was so he had no business getting into the department store business. And yet he annihilated all of them. And he didn't invent anything. So I'm thinking, like, what is this? What is so magical about him? And then I looked at some more recent examples, like Zuckerberg with Facebook. We like to think that he invented Facebook, but he didn't. He was years behind companies like MySpace and Yahoo. Um,
Oh, we lost him briefly. I think he'll be back. So he's far behind those folks. Hopefully, David's going to get back on track with the internet here in a second. Give him another second to do that, everybody.
you possibly have, and no advantages. Yeah.
Well,
And so I saw that what ended up happening is they were out implementing their competition. And that's what I ended up focusing on in the book.
Well, we lost a little bit of what you said to the internet having a hiccup, I guess. But you were talking about Sam Walton, you were talking about Mark Zuckerberg, and then we lost a little bit. So anything that you want to tie where you started and where you finished back together, you were talking about what are the commonalities, right? And through your work, talking about all those people, you identified, at least in the book, you talk about 5 skills, right? Should we dive into those real quick?
Sure, because when I looked at all these leaders who were so much better at getting things done, interestingly enough, there were no exceptions.
And we're losing them
Skills.
again. There were no exceptions to these 5 skills. We're just having a little bit of a gap. Hopefully, we can make this not have this happen too often. So let's talk about the 5 skills. Right. I mean, I'll sort of let you sort of lay out what they are, and then I want to dive in. We'll talk about some of them a little bit more, but just sort of give us the overview first.
Well, the first one was ability to build a team. And you can't build an organization. You can't take companies the way you want to take them in organizations unless you're working through other people. So every one of these people were extraordinary at identifying talent, attracting them, retaining them, giving them good feedback. So that was the first one. The second one was they were really good at reaching out and getting advice, good at seeking and taking advice. The third is that they were extraordinarily good at managing their time. They managed their time, and then they taught the people that worked for them how to manage
their time. Yep.
Obsession with quality. So the fourth one is they had obsession with quality. And the last was this ability to really set and adhere to priorities. And then I thought about those and I broke them down into sub-skills and realized, well, those all sound good, but how can the everyday person, Kevin, like you and me, implement those? And so I broke each of those down into its subsets and laid it out in the book. And the book is really a how-to manual on how to get your arms around those skills.
Well, yeah, you call it a handbook, and that's what I would think of it as being, right? Like we take those 5 skills, right? Building teams, being especially good with our time. I'm paraphrasing now, right? Being willing to seek and take advice, having an obsession with quality, and setting and adhering to priorities. And then you broke those things down, and that's really the book. What I want to do is sort of just capture some thoughts from my reading and have a conversation starting there. But first, since this isn't just something that you researched, you've been leading a long time. Now that you look at these 5 skills for yourself as the author, as the curator of these 5 skills, if you will, which of them has been hardest for you?
Hardest for me personally, Kevin?
Mm-hmm.
I think building a team. The reason is that it's just hard work. And a lot of people want to build a team by relying on gut feel when they interview. They read the resume on the way into the meeting, or they sort of wing it on their Zoom interview. And doing a really good job of building a team means you're working with people. You've got to try to read people. You've got to prepare for the interviews. You got to be willing to have hard conversations. You've got to be willing to give people feedback when maybe you don't really want to and you'd like to put it off. And so that's the one that I think is the hardest, that most people the most.
So one of the things I like about the book is that you don't just talk about all of those things, which are all critically important. Like once they're on my team, how do I help them improve? How do I create collaboration across the team, build relationships with the team, all of that. But one of the things that I think when I read a book, especially when I read a book to have the author as a guest like you, one of the things I'm thinking about, like what's one of the big ideas, or maybe even one of the tactical ideas that I will take from this book, and I will be able to say this is where this came from for me. And there were some interesting things to me in the hiring area that I thought were especially helpful, because again, we can have a commitment to build the team once they're there, but we're also often picking those people who are going to be there. So let's talk a little bit more about that front end piece. What are a couple of your big pieces of advice around hiring?
So in the area of hiring, Kevin, I wanted to make it everything in the book is something that you could sort of implement the next day. So, for example, in the book, I talk about the importance of hiring as a team. So let's say that you and I are looking to hire somebody, Kevin. I explain why it's important for you and I to interview the person together versus you interview them and then I interview them, because that way we have a common set of data, so we can talk about what we heard together. So that would be a everyday quick example. The second is I talk about how you ask people questions in a way that what you're trying to do is you're trying to answer questions against a scorecard. So first you need to build a scorecard. And then you don't go on Google and say, 100, most clever questions to ask in an interview, which is how I used to interview. But instead you say, what are the questions that I need to answer in order to rate this person against this particular scorecard? So those would be two examples, for example.
So give me an example, or give us an example of something that you would say ought to be on that scorecard, so we can sort of think about that a little more
Perfect.
specifically.
Perfect. So I used to, for example, ask when I was interviewing, how do you know the light goes off when the refrigerator door closes? I mean, that was a ridiculous question. I'm embarrassed to say it on your podcast, Kevin, because all I was doing is I was sort of showing off with a clever question. Going to your scorecard, you don't want someone who can figure out whether, let's say that we're hiring, say, a VP of sales or someone who's in charge of revenue. You're not looking for someone who can figure out whether the light goes out in the refrigerator. What you're doing is you're trying to figure out someone who can drive sales by 15% next year. You don't care what school they went to. You don't care what their experience is. So one of the things on the scorecard would be, can drive sales by 15%, a 15% increase next year, or can successfully hire 5. That's what belongs on a scorecard. And that completely shapes how you ask questions, because now you're asking questions. Okay, how do I figure out whether this person can do a good job hiring people? So you start asking questions about, how many people did you hire last year? How many of them worked out? Tell me about your hiring process. Tell me about someone who struggled a little bit that you were able to turn around. Tell me about someone you let go and why you let them go. You do that for about 10, 15 minutes, you're going to have a really, really good idea on whether this person is good at hiring or not. So that would be an example, Kevin. And by the way,
So
once you have a clear scorecard, the hiring process is actually easier, it's more interesting, and it's more informative for both you and the other person.
which is where one of the things I want to say next is, if you are that clear on what your criteria are, the scorecard, you're going to do a better job of fleshing out the right person, but you're going to be helping them determine if this is the right place for them too, because obviously we're screening, but we're hoping they're screening as well, right?
That's right. And the best people find the interview way more engaging. I mean, you want to hire someone who's high trajectory, who's going to clobber that job. And if you start asking them about their own experiences about hiring and their successes and their failures and so forth, they're going to be engaged with that. You ask them sort of surfacey questions, how do you describe yourself? Do you feel like you're a motivated person? It's just a ho-hum interview. So they're going to leave that interview energized.
And who's going to answer
wow,
that?
this is
Well,
someone I want to work for.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. And who's going to answer that question with, well, I really don't think I am all that motivated, actually. Like, what other kind of answer are you going to get? Hello, right? There's that. One of the things, back to this point of what am I going to remember from the book? There's always the conversation about what are you looking for when you're hiring, and we've just been talking about that. And and you frame it so well in the book with 3 words. So I'm going to say these 3 words, and I'm going to have you say a little bit more about them. Like that, is it about experience or is it about attributes? Right, experience versus attributes. So talk a little bit about that to help clarify for people again what they should really be looking for.
So the book, The Manager's Handbook, breaks down your scorecard into 2 areas. One are outcomes. So Kevin, I just described an outcome. For example, I want sales to go up by 15%, or I want someone who can hire somebody, hire 3 sales reps. Attributes, so those are outcomes. Attributes are characteristics about them as a person. And what you want to do is you want to try to match the attributes with both the culture of the company and also attributes that you've seen in other people in similar positions that have been successful. It could be as light as a sense of humor that they have, or it could be that they have a real like get things done to. And if I ask, okay, Kevin, we're going to go into a grit or not, and we're going to spend 20 minutes talking about that, I promise you that you would have a very good point of view on whether this person has grit or not. As opposed to, let's go visit with them and let's see whether we like the person or not. And that's the classic mistake that people make when they hire, is they hire people that they like, but you don't want someone who like. You're not looking for a buddy. You're looking for someone who can get the job done.
Yeah. Or we either hire people we like or people that are like us, right? Which is also not necessarily a very good strategy. So you and I share a perspective. One of the 5 skills tells me this, as well as from reading the book, a perspective about how we use our time, how we view productivity, how we work to be more productive. So, what are a couple things? I mean, the skill as described is a fanatical custodian of time. Give us a couple of examples of things that can help us be better in this area.
That whole thread of being a good custodian of time started when I was having a cup of coffee with a friend of mine, Tom Staggs, who at the time was the chief operating officer at Disney. And I remember, Kevin, I was meeting him at Stanford, and we were having a cup of coffee, and I was 5 minutes late, and I was all kind of harried and thinking about the email that I didn't get done. And there Tom was, just calm as can be. And I talked to him about it, and I asked him, like, how do you do it? And what I realized is that, I mean, by the way, he had 250,000 people reporting to him in 6 continents. Okay. And so he had systems in place that allowed him to manage his day the way he did. Of course, it included that he had a good team. And so that what I did in the book, The Manager's Handbook, is I looked at very simple techniques that people did, starting with a survey that had been done at Harvard where they studied 27 high-performing CEOs, and they followed them around in 15-minute increments, collecting, if you can imagine, the 60,000 pieces of data on how they managed their day. And they found certain commonalities. And I'll give you one example. One example is cutting down your meeting times from a half an hour to 20 minutes, or from 60 minutes to 40 minutes. Now, that's something anybody can do tomorrow morning. In my case, by doing that, I just went back and I looked at my calendar. So I started doing this years ago. I looked back at my calendar. That one thing gave me 90 extra minutes every single day. And every one of those meetings, we still got everything done. In fact, we were more productive because people strive to be more productive during that period of time. The whole purpose of the Manager's Handbook is to give you things like that when you put down a book, you can implement them the next day.
You know, one of the things that and I love that. I do the same thing. Like, why does it have to? Well, there's nothing magical about 60. There's nothing magical about 30. And another thing that I've sometimes done is, like, I'll block 30 on the calendar. Like, if I'm having a meeting with a client, I might tell them we're having a 20-minute meeting. I might block 30 on my calendar. Why? Because there's usually something I have to do after that meeting that I can often do in that 5, 6, 8, 10 minutes that are left, when it's the freshest, when it's the clearest for me. And that's an ad that I've done with this that's been very helpful to me. But compressing the times, what's magical about 60 or 30? I mean, I love that. It's proven. We do the same thing often. Really good strategy. Give me another one. I have another one that I want to talk about, but do you have one more in the time area that you want to share?
Well, the in this area, one of the fundamental sort of ways that we think about it is quantity of time. So I just talked about quantity of time, where you can sort of create more time, if you will. But the other is quality of time. So we talk about this concept of deep work versus shallow work. And shallow work is responding to email, making a plane reservation, all that kind of transactional stuff that you need to do, but it doesn't really add much value to your organization. And deep work is where you're thoughtful, and it's really where you add value to your organization. And so we talk a little bit about in the book, well, are you most, we all have a chronotype. So some people, their deep work is best done in the morning versus the afternoon. So let's say in my case, I'm a morning person in terms of my deep work time. So I
Me too.
schedule my calendar in a way that are uninterrupted, and I make sure they're in the morning for my deep work, and I shift all my transactional work to the afternoon. All I'm doing is I'm chunking together all the free time into one nice block in the morning, and I'm chunking all the transactional work together in the afternoon. That was transformative for me, Kevin.
Yeah, that happens to be my chronotype as well.
Okay.
Is morning versus afternoon, and it is transformative. It makes a huge difference in our productivity in terms of what we're actually accomplishing. Right? It's not about activity; it's about accomplishment, and I love that. So, you share a metaphor in the book related to your father, and because you heard me at the beginning say something about my farm, our farm, uh, this resonated with me, and so I want you to talk about the idea of walking behind the tractor. You're gonna have to give the backstory here, and you and I could probably go on a long sub tangent on all that, but talk about this because I think the metaphor is so powerful.
So the last section of the book, it's obviously broken out into 5 parts for each of the 5 skill areas. The last one is an obsession with quality. And so this chapter is called Walk Behind the Tractor. And it is my favorite, chapter title. So I'm thrilled that you picked up on it. So my dad had a company that manufactured farm equipment, but farm equipment, like cars, are sold through dealers. So he manufactured the farm equipment, but they were sold to dealers who then subsequently sold it to farmers. So his customer was not the end user. And that's a critical component if you're thinking about quality, is who is the end user. Now, sometimes it might be as direct as a dealer network, but another example, which I talk about in the book, is Intuit. But before I get to Intuit, so why walk behind the tractor? So on the weekends, when I was a little kid, I would go out with my dad on the weekends, and we would literally walk behind the tractor. We would be walking behind a farmer's tractor, watching his implements work. And the farmer was not actually the customer of my father's. Father wanted to get
Oh,
the information from
we
is
lost you just in the wrong spot, so I need you to say that again.
oh, I was saying that my father, the customer was the dealer, but the end user was the farmer. So that my father wanted to know what the farmer felt about the equipment, how the equipment was working for the farmer, the end user. And a more modern day example that I talk about in the book is Intuit. So, Intuit sells their software, and they sell, QuickBooks, TurboTax, MailChimp, and so forth. They don't, they may sell it to a retailer, or they may sell it to a reseller, or they may sell it to a company, but they have a system called Follow Them Home, where they want to watch the actual user use the product. Now, why is that so important? If I send out a survey, 1 to 5, did you like my product or service or not? What information I'm going to get there? Not really anything useful. I mean, it might help my ego, might help me feel better. It's kind of a scorecard, but I'm not going to get any real good information. But if I'm watching the end user use the product, important insights. When I watch the end user use the product, that's where I'm going to get really important insights and innovations. And Intuit's a fantastic example, because for 3 or 4 decades, they have dominated a software area that is actually quite mundane, and they own it decade after decade after decade, because they're always one step ahead of the competition, because they know their end user better than anybody else.
They're walking behind the tractor, if you will, everybody.
Exactly.
So the ideas that we've talked about, the 5 skills, right? Whether it's quality, whether it's priorities, whether it's seeking and taking advice, and we could do a whole episode on each of the 5 skills, and I realize that. But all 5 of them are timeless. And yet we're living in a time in a post-pandemic world where many, not all, but many leaders and managers are leading teams that are not down the hall or in the next cubicle or even in the same zip code. And so what thought or do you have a thought or two about how this is different when we're doing it at a distance? Is there anything based on what we've talked about or about any of the 5 skills or sub skills that you think we really ought to be focusing on at a distance?
Well, this may seem simplistic, but I've been asked this question a lot by other people, by students, other faculty member, and CEOs, and I've come to the conclusion that the most straightforward answer is all of this is more important, and I'll tell you why. When you have all this face-to-face contact with your team, like the way you were describing, sort of pre-pandemic, you've got some shortcuts. You've got some other sources of information. You don't have to be as precise. But when your team is only convening 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and then you're not giving good feedback, that's really critical, because not only are you missing that one opportunity to give good feedback, and of course the book talks about the right way to give good feedback, but the second is that all of our employees are out for bid every single day on platforms like LinkedIn and so forth. And so if you're not running a tight organization, your competitors' ability to poach employees.
Yeah, is higher than ever, right? Higher than ever. So, is there anything that I didn't ask today, or that we didn't talk about that you wish we would have?
Well, there was an insight that I had about the book that came actually after the book was written, when I was talking to people who are using the book. And I was with someone who owns a massive real estate company in the United States. And he said, what organizations, because I talked about individuals like Sam Walton and so forth, what organizations implement these 5 skills? And what came to mind instantly was Amazon, for example. And then the light bulb went off, Kevin, because I got thinking, wait a minute. What really was transformative was not that Jeff Bezos or Sam Walton or Tim Cook or Scott Cook, that they embraced these 5 skills. They were teachers, not doers. And what they did is they created organizations where everybody within the organization was embracing these 5 skills. And so that's the one thing that I wish I'd had in the book, which I said, this is not a book for just you. If you
Yeah, this is a book for the organization.
skills across your organization.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's exactly right. And that additional insight of not just don't focus on being a leader that can do these things that are using these skills, but that you're teaching these skills, not just through your modeling of them, but through the processes and the expectations that you set. That I think is absolutely right. I'm going to shift gears, David, before we finish, and ask you, what do you do for fun?
Hmm. Well, in the summertime, I like to be out on the water. So, whether it's a rowboat or my sailboat, if I'm on the water, I'm happiest. So that's the first thing I do for fun. The second thing I do for fun year round is I've got 2 grandkids. And there is nothing more delightful than to be down on the floor with my 2 grandkids playing around with whatever they want to do, whether it's a train set or anything. It's just fun to do. So those are my 2 favorite things to do these days.
So maybe at some point it's with the grandkids in the water or on the water, right? Then you get
Absolutely.
all together at once. So the only thing you knew I would ask you, you didn't know I would ask about walking behind the tractor, but you did know that I would ask you this question. So David, what are you reading these days, or what's something you've read recently?
Yeah, so I'm actually finishing up a book that I'd read before called The Outsiders. A friend of mine wrote the book, Will Thorndike, and he profiled a number of CEOs who had extraordinary performance over very, very long periods of time, principally around how they managed capital allocation and so forth. So it's written for the everyday reader. It's not a technical book, but it's sort of a fascinating book on people like how Warren Buffett or Catherine Graham of Washington Post completely outperformed everybody else in the way that they managed their capital. It's a fascinating quick read. Each chapter is an individual CEO. And I love the book. So it's written by a friend of mine, Will Thorndike. So it's fun to read something that a friend had written.
That is true. So the outsiders for you, and you'll have access to that in the show notes, as well as a link to David's great book, The Manager's Handbook. 5 simple steps to build a team, stay focused, make better decisions, and crush your competition. Where can people? Where do you want people to connect with you? Where can they learn more about the book? Where do you want to direct people, David?
Well, I stay really current on LinkedIn. So that would be the first place. I also stay current on X, formerly Twitter. So those are the 2 things. I do have a website, but truthfully, I try to keep my LinkedIn site very current, and I love having people, ask to join on my network on LinkedIn.
I love that, and I encourage you to do that. I find more and more that LinkedIn is a really useful place to be, not only in terms of following smart people. I can say much the same thing in terms of how much time we spend putting content there and trying to be helpful. And so I encourage you to follow and connect with David and do the same with me. So I have a question now, but I want to thank you, David, for being here. Of course, it was a pleasure to have you. I've been looking forward to this. We had a little bit of a delay in making this happen, and it was worth the wait. But I have a question for all of the rest of you now. It's a question I ask you every single week. There it is. Now what? Okay, so what did you get here that you're going to go use? Maybe you got an idea about compressing the length of your meetings. As David said, you could start that tomorrow. Maybe you got a sense about how you could think about your hiring process differently. Maybe think immediately about what you could do different with the questions that you ask. Those are just a couple of the several other very specific things that we talked about today. Or maybe what you are going to do is something that you sort of connected from what you heard. It doesn't matter what action you take as a result, nearly as much as that you take some action. You get far more from this if you take action than if you don't. So, David, thank you again for being here. Such a pleasure to have you. And everybody, we do this every week, so you should really come on back. So if you're on the podcast, you know that they'll show up for you automatically if you subscribe. So why don't you? And if you're enjoying them, why don't you invite someone to join us next week for the next episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast?